It's week 3 of the NFL season, and here are my predictions for this week. But first, how did I do in my predictions in week 2? In week 2, I was 9-7 in my predictions. Kicking off the week on Thursday Night Football, we have the 1-1 Patriots versus the 1-1 Jets. Last week, the Patriots lost 23-20 in overtime versus the Seahawks. In that game, Jacoby Brissett went 15 for 27 with 149 yards and a touchdown. Hunter Henry led the team in receiving with 8 receptions for 109 yards. Then Antonio Gibson had 11 carries for 96 yards, and Ramondre Stevenson had 21 carries for 81 yards and a touchdown. Then on defense, Keon White had 1.5 sacks, and now has 4 on the season. Then for the Jets, they beat the Titans 24-17. Aaron Rodgers was 18 for 30 with 176 yards and 2 touchdowns. Breece Hall had 62 yards rushing and had 52 yards receiving with a receiving touchdown. And rookie Braylon Allen had 33 yards rushing with a touchdown and 23 yards receiving with a touchdown. Then on defense, Will McDonald, the fourth, had 3 sacks. Both of these teams have great defenses, but this game's going to rely on the better offense. So that's why I have the Jets winning. Then on Sunday, we have the 0-2 Giants versus the 1-1 Browns. The Giants are coming off a very close loss, 21-18 versus the Commanders. In that game, the Giants didn't give up any touchdowns. They gave up 7 field goals. Daniel Jones played much better than week 1, and he had 178 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then Devin Singletary had 16 carries for 95 yards and a touchdown. And Malik Neighbors had a great game with 10 receptions for 127 yards and a touchdown. And the Giants' defense played very good with 5 sacks. Then for the Browns, they won 18-13 against the Jaguars. Deshaun Watson played a lot better than week 1, even though looking at his stats, they're not that great. He was 22 for 34 with 186 yards and had 20 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown. Their run game was also a lot better with 125 yards and a touchdown as a team. And Jerry Jeudy had a very good game with 5 receptions for 73 yards. Then on the defensive side, Myles Garrett had another strip sack. So in 2 games so far, he has 2 sacks and 2 forced fumbles. And as a team, they had a combined 4 sacks. The Browns are a much better team than the Giants, and I have them winning. Next, the 2-0 Chargers versus the 2-0 Steelers. The Chargers beat the Panthers 26-3. Once again, the Chargers didn't have much of a pass game, only having 130 yards through the air, but Justin Herbert still had 2 touchdowns and an interception. And Quentin Johnston had 51 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. Then in the run game, J.K. Dobbins had 17 carries for 131 yards and a touchdown. Gus Edwards had 59 yards rushing. And for the Steelers, in both games this season, their offense hasn't looked great, but it's got the job done. They beat the Broncos 13-6. In this game, Justin Fields had 117 yards and a touchdown. And the team had 141 yards rushing. But their defense has been very good. In that game versus the Broncos, they had 2 sacks and 2 interceptions. And they have only given up 16 points through the first 2 games. I could see this game going either way, but I have the Chargers winning. Next, the 2-0 Texans versus the 2-0 Vikings. The Texans are coming off of a 19-13 win over the Bears. CJ Stroud went 23 for 36 with 260 yards and a touchdown. Nico Collins led the team in receiving with 8 receptions, 135 yards and a touchdown, and that was their only touchdown of the game. Then the rest of their points came from 4 field goals. But their defense was amazing in this game, having 7 sacks and 2 interceptions. Then for the Vikings, they upset the 49ers and won 23-17. Sam Darnold had another good game, going 17 for 26 with 268 yards, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. And Justin Jefferson had 4 receptions for 133 yards and a touchdown. And that touchdown he had was 97 yards. Then on defense, they had 6 sacks and an interception. The Vikings have looked very good so far this season through these first 2 games, and I think they're going to win again. Next, the 1-1 Eagles versus the 2-0 Saints. The Eagles are coming off of a very close loss, 22-21 versus the Falcons. In that game, Jalen Hurts went 23 for 30, 183 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Devontae Smith led the team in receiving with 7 receptions for 76 yards and a touchdown. Then Saquon Barkley had 85 yards rushing, and Jalen Hurts also had 85 yards rushing and a touchdown. Then for the Saints, they beat the Cowboys 44-19. Derek Carr only passed 16 times in this game, going 11 for 16 with 243 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Then Alvin Kamara had a huge game with 115 yards rushing, 3 rushing touchdowns, then also had 65 yards receiving and a receiving touchdown. And in just 2 games this season, they have already scored 91 points, by far the most of any team. This Saints team is very hot, and they're at home for this game, so I have them winning. Next, the 0-2 Broncos versus the 2-0 Buccaneers. So far this season, Bo Nix has struggled a lot. In this game, he went 20 for 35 with 246 yards and 2 interceptions, and so far in the season he already has 4 interceptions. But Josh Reynolds had 4 receptions for 93 yards, and they couldn't get the run game going either, with only 64 yards as a team. Then for the Buccaneers, they beat the Lions 20-16. Baker Mayfield went 12 for 19 with 185 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, then had 34 yards rushing with a touchdown. And Chris Godwin led their team with receiving with 7 receptions for 117 yards and a touchdown. The Buccaneers are a much better team, and I have them winning. Next, the 1-1 Packers versus the 0-2 Titans. The Packers beat the Colts 16-10, and in that game, they were dominant on the ground with 261 rushing yards as a team. Josh Jacobs led the way with 32 carries for 151 yards. Then backup quarterback Malik Willis went 12 for 14 with 122 yards and a touchdown. And on defense, they had a sack and 3 interceptions. Then for the Titans, they had a pretty close game against the Jets, losing 24-17. And this game was tied 17-17 late in the 4th quarter, but they ended up allowing a 20-yard touchdown to Braylon Allen with 4:31 left in the 4th quarter. Will Levis again didn't have a great game, going 19 for 28, 192 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Then Tony Pollard had 17 carries for 62 yards, and Calvin Ridley had a 10-yard rushing touchdown and 4 receptions for 77 yards and a touchdown. With the way the Packers' run game has been this season, it looks like it doesn't matter who's at quarterback. And even if Jordan Love doesn't play again this week, I have the Packers winning. Next, the 1-1 Bears versus the 0-2 Colts. Last week, Caleb Williams had 174 yards and 2 interceptions, while also having 44 yards rushing. And even with all this talent on their offense, it hasn't been clicking yet. But for the Colts, their offense hasn't looked great either. Anthony Richardson went 17 for 34, 204 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions. Jonathan Taylor did have a good game with 12 carries for 103 yards, but simple, Anthony Richardson just needs to play better. And I have the Bears winning. Next, the 0-2 Panthers versus the 1-1 Raiders. Bryce Young had another bad game, going 18 for 26 with 84 yards and an interception. And as a team, they had a total of 159 yards and only 7 first downs. But for this week, they did bench Bryce Young, and Andy Dalton will be starting. Then for the Raiders, they upset the Ravens 26-23, and they won this game by hitting a 38-yard walk-off field goal with 27 seconds left. Gardner Minshew went 30 for 38, 276 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. And Devontae Adams had 9 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. Then Max Crosby had a very good game with 6 tackles, 2 sacks, 4 TFLs, and a pass deflection. This Raiders team looks like it could be very good, and I have them winning. Next, the 1-1 Dolphins versus the 2-0 Seahawks. Last week on Thursday Night Football, the Dolphins lost 31-10 against the Bills. In that game, Tua started off the game pretty bad, going 17 for 25 with 3 interceptions. But on a play where he ran for the first down, he ended up getting another concussion. But he's going to be out for at least the next 4 games. But Devin Achane had 96 yards rushing and 69 yards and a touchdown receiving. Then for the Seahawks, Geno Smith went 33 for 44, 327 yards and a touchdown. DK Metcalf had 10 receptions for 129 yards and a touchdown, and her defense had 3 sacks. And with Tua out, I have the Seahawks winning. Next, the 0-2 Ravens versus the 1-1 Cowboys. Lamar Jackson had 247 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 interception. He also had 5 carries for 45 yards. Then Derrick Henry had 84 yards rushing and a touchdown. And Zay Flowers led the team in receiving with 7 receptions for 91 yards and a touchdown. Then on the defensive side, they had 5 sacks and an interception. But so far this season, they have already given up 53 points. Then for Dallas, they got blown out 44-19 to the Saints. And in that game, Dak Prescott had 293 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. CeeDee Lamb had 4 receptions for 90 yards and a touchdown. But their defense gave up 35 points in just the first half. I think this game's going to be very close, and I could see it going either way. But the Cowboys are at home, so I have the Cowboys winning. Next, the 1-1 Lions versus the 1-1 Cardinals. In Week 2 versus the Buccaneers, Jared Goff went 34 for 55 for 307 yards and 2 interceptions. Jahmyr Gibbs had 84 yards rushing, and Amon-Ra St. Brown had 11 receptions for 119 yards. Then on defense, Aiden Hutchinson had 4.5 sacks and already has 5.5 on the season. And for the Cardinals, they're coming off of a 41-10 win over the Rams, and so far this season, their offense has been great, putting up 41 points in Week 2, then 28 points versus the Bills in Week 1. Kyler Murray went 17 for 21, 266 yards and 3 touchdowns. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 4 receptions for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns, and all of that came in the first quarter. Then James Conner had 21 carries for 122 yards and a touchdown, and the team combined for 231 yards rushing. Then on defense, Dennis Gardeck had 6 tackles with 3 sacks. With the way this Cardinals offense has been playing, I have them winning. Then we have the 1-1 49ers versus the 0-2 Rams. In this game, Brock Purdy had 319 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Deebo Samuel had 8 receptions for 110 yards, but he got injured during this game and has a calf strain and is doubtful for their Week 3 game. Then Jordan Mason had another great game while replacing Christian McCaffrey while he's on the IR, and he had 20 carries for 100 yards and a touchdown. Then for the Rams, they just keep getting more and more injuries, and in this game, Cooper Kupp got injured and could be missing a few weeks. And with Puka Nacua already on the IR, their receiving core is a mess right now. But in that game versus the Cardinals, Matt Stafford was 19 for 27, 216 yards, no touchdowns and no interceptions. The team only had 53 yards rushing, and their total yards was just 245, while they also gave up 489. With all the Rams injuries, I have the 49ers winning. Then moving over to Sunday Night Football, we have the 2-0 Chiefs versus the 1-1 Falcons. The Chiefs are coming off of a 1-point win over the Bengals, 26-25. Patrick Mahomes is coming off one of his worst career games, going 18 for 25, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Then during this game, Isaiah Pacheco had 19 carries for 90 yards, but he ended up fracturing his fibula and is expected to miss 6 to 8 weeks. But Rashee Rice had another good game, with 5 receptions for 75 yards and a touchdown. Then for the Falcons, they had a comeback win versus the Eagles, 22-21, and they scored the game-winning touchdown with 34 seconds left in the game. Kirk Cousins went 20 for 29, 241 yards and 2 touchdowns. Bijan Robinson had 14 carries for 97 yards. Then Darnell Mooney led the team in receiving with 3 receptions, 88 yards, and a touchdown. But I have the Chiefs winning. Then moving over to Monday Night Football, there's 2 games on Monday. The first one is the 0-2 Jaguars versus the 2-0 Bills. The Jaguars' offense has struggled a lot so far. In this game, Trevor Lawrence was 14 for 30, 220 yards, with no touchdowns and no interceptions. As a team, they had 127 yards rushing and a touchdown. Then Brian Robinson Jr. led the team with 2 receptions with 94 yards. Then for the Bills, Josh Allen was 13 for 19, 139 yards and a touchdown. Then James Cook had a great game with 78 yards rushing and 2 rushing touchdowns, while also having a 17-yard receiving touchdown. And I have the Bills winning. Then finally, we have the 1-1 Commanders versus the 0-2 Bengals. For the Commanders, they beat the Giants 21-18. In this game, the Commanders didn't score any touchdowns, but Austin Seibert made 7 field goals. Jaden Daniels had a pretty good game, going 23 for 29, 226 yards, and 44 yards rushing. Zach Ertz led the team in receiving with 4 receptions for 62 yards. Then for the Bengals, Joe Burrow had 258 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mike Gesicki led the team with 7 receptions and 91 yards. And as a team, they only had 74 yards rushing. But a very concerning thing is, in this game, Jamar Chase only had 5 targets and had 4 receptions for 35 yards. Through 2 games so far, they have only targeted Jamar Chase 11 times. But I think the Bengals will be able to figure it out and win this game. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.